As Hurricane Ian continues to upend the lives of millions across the southeastern United States, authorities in Florida and South Carolina have begun sifting through the storm debris to assess the toll from one of the strongest and most expensive hurricanes in recent American history. The storm moved north after hitting Florida, gathering some of its strength back from the warm Atlantic Ocean waters, and hitting South Carolina on Friday, making landfall in Georgetown, 60 miles north of Charleston, and destroying parts of 4 popular jetties, including 2 at Myrtle. Although Charleston was largely spared the worst of the storm, the city's mayor John Tecklenburg told the local Post and Courier that the impact on communities was still significant, with roads closed, residents without power and flood damage. It was the third hurricane to make landfall in the state in 6 years, after Matthew in 2016 and Isaias in 2020, both causing significant damage. Dozens of people, mostly in Florida, have died from drowning and other hurricane-related causes as the storm originally ripped through Florida's coast earlier this week, flooding streets and homes. Florida officials confirmed that at least 27 people have died so far, though that number is expected to rise substantially as rescue crews search through the debris for survivors through the weekend. In fact, the Lee County, Florida, Sheriff's Office reportedly confirmed the deaths of 35 people from Ian in its jurisdiction on Saturday, though it's unclear whether state officials have made the same confirmation. 3 people died in western Cuba earlier this week in the storm. Aerial footage taken by the National Ocean Service shows the once fertile area of Florida's coastal community, which was worst hit by the hurricane, is now completely damaged. One resident described to the Tampa Bay Times the destruction of Fort Myers Beach as if someone took an atomic bomb and dropped it. As Hurricane Ian continues to upend the lives of millions across the southeastern United States, authorities in Florida and South Carolina have begun sifting through the storm debris to assess the toll from one of the strongest and most expensive hurricanes in recent American history. The storm moved north after hitting Florida, gathering some of its strength back from the warm Atlantic Ocean waters, and hitting South Carolina on Friday, making landfall in Georgetown, 60 miles north of Charleston, and destroying parts of 4 popular jetties, including 2 at Myrtle beaches. Although Charleston was largely spared the worst of the storm, the city's mayor John Tecklenburg told the local Post and Courier that the impact on communities was still significant, with roads closed, residents without power and flood damage. It was the third hurricane to make landfall in the state in 6 years, after Matthew in 2016. Meanwhile, heavy rains caused environmental flooding in more inland areas of central Florida. Officials closed a 14-mile stretch of Interstate 75 in Florida late Friday due to flooding in the Myakka River. Residents in some of Florida's most affected coastal communities are questioning why evacuation orders came later than expected despite storm forecasts. Disaster modeling firm Karen Clark co-estimates that Hurricane Ian could become the 4th most expensive hurricane in U.S. history, inflicting more than $100 billion in damage, the Associated Press reported. U.S. President Joe Biden on Saturday issued an emergency declaration in North Carolina for the Federal Emergency Management Agency to coordinate all disaster relief efforts aimed at alleviating the hardship and suffering caused by Hurricane Ian. Many of the reported deaths have drowned, including a 68-year-old woman who was swept into the sea by the waves.
My grandparents' house.
A 67-year-old man waiting to be rescued died after falling into rising water inside his home, authorities said. Other hurricane-related deaths include a 22-year-old woman who died after an ATV rolled off a damaged road and a 71-year-old man who fell from a roof while installing window shutters. An 80-year-old woman and a 94-year-old man who relied on an oxygen machine also died after equipment stopped working during a power outage. After hitting Florida, Hurricane Ian hit Grand Strand as a Category 1 hurricane at around 2 p.m. on Friday, damaging several docks and inundating low-lying coastal areas. Before the storm landed, people stopped by Garden City Pier to watch the raging ocean. Garden City Beach was flooded at 1 p.m. Every business on Atlantic Avenue was closed, so some people had towed their vehicles on the pavement to get them on the ground as high as possible as the road became only suitable for fish and boats. At the Kingfisher Inn, Veronica Cooper and her family weathered a storm in their 7th-floor room. The year before, Cooper had bought from a relative a shareholding in the type of timeshare cooperative that gave them room 1 week a year. The family, who all live in Sumter, huddled around their TV watching the news reports as the storm came. There is flooding in low-lying areas as shrimp boat washed ashore on Myrtle Beach. Pawleys Island Pier, Cherry Grove Pier, Apache Pier, and 2nd Avenue Myrtle Beach Pier were all damaged. The Garden City Pier outside their building seemed unaffected. Reports of damage along the South Carolina coast came before Hurricane Ian's second U.S. landing near Georgetown. The end of the Pawleys Island Pier collapsed and drifted south at around 1:30 p.m., according to a Twitter post from the Pawleys Island Police Department, with water flowing over Moles Inlet Marshwalk on Friday afternoon. On the Arcadian coast near the Atlantic coast, between Myrtle Beach and North Myrtle Beach, video shows storm surges rapidly inundating the waterfront recreation area. Garden City Beach, where the streets near Garden City Pier were inundated with relatively little rainfall, were significantly flooded. Hurricane wave warning remains in effect for parts of the North Carolina coast. Surges of more than 4 feet are possible, which can make the trek difficult, Fox Weather reports. Sheets of rain lashed trees and power lines and left much of Charleston's downtown peninsula underwater by midday. 4 piers along the coast, including 2 at Myrtle Beach, crumbled into the churning and drifting waves. Online cameras show seawater filling the surroundings in Garden City up to calf high. A hurricane warning stretches from the Savannah River to Cape Fear, with possible flooding across the Carolinas and Southwest Virginia, the National Hurricane Center said. Charleston County emergency services were suspended during the storm due to strong winds. In a tweet, officials said they were halting response efforts due to current wind conditions and would resume service as soon as it was safe to do so. Charleston police also restricted access to the city's Battery area, a site at the tip of the peninsula that is home to many historic multi-million-dollar homes. Storm surges of 4 to 7 feet are predicted along the coast of South Carolina, including the city of Charleston. Waves of 3 to 5 feet are expected from the South Carolina-North Carolina border to Cape Fear, North Carolina. Storm surges of 3 to 5 feet are also expected from the Savannah River to Edisto Beach in South Carolina. National Guard troops stationed in South Carolina to assist in the aftermath, including water rescue. In Washington, President Joe Biden approved a declaration of emergency for the state, a step needed to speed up federal aid for recovery after Ian's passing. Ian is expected to weaken rapidly on land, then transition into a post-tropical cyclone on Friday evening. It is expected to disappear in western North Carolina or Virginia by Saturday night. In North Carolina, heavy rain and winds blew into the state Friday afternoon. Governor Roy Cooper warned residents to be vigilant, as up to 20.3 centimeters of rain could fall in some areas with strong winds. Hurricane Ian is at our doorstep. Heavy rains and strong winds are expected in most of our state, Cooper said.